Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have my friend Cleo Paskal with me. She is, you guys know her. She's been on the channel multiple times. She's got a very good insight on the Indo-Pacific, Chinese activities in the Indo-Pacific, the Chinese threat in the Indo-Pacific. Because the way things are going right now and the way the US is engaged in multiple other regions, it seems like the focus is not here. The focus is not where it's supposed to be. So, Cleo, hello, how are you? And thank you.
I'm good. It's good to see you again, and
Likewise.
as a Canadian, I was sort of joking before the show. Suddenly, like I'm the good North American, so I've gone on an Indian show. So, yeah, what a time it's been, man. It's kind of who thought we'd be here? A little crazy.
Mm. So, how do you see what's happening today as far as Donald Trump's Indo-Pacific policy? Let me just give you a broad-sided question to open with.
Right. So I'm gonna describe to you a place in the United States that many people, including Americans, don't know is part of the United States. But it had a governor. It's a territory called the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, and it had a governor. There you go. So this map. This is an important map. This map shows the exclusive economic zones of these island countries. So you tend to think of the Pacific as being empty. Some people do, but people who know naval strategy or economic exclusive economic zones, no, it's really not, because every island you have can get up to 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone around it. So there's countries that are very small population wise, like Kiribati, but they have an exclusive economic zone that cover part of the Pacific Ocean the size of India. So they can be quite large. And there is a lot of the United States in the Pacific. So the up in the top right hand corner, that big blue section up there, that's Hawaii. And west of Hawaii, you can see there's quite a lot of dark blue, which is America. You have what's circled in red is what we're going to talk about, the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, which is known by its acronym of CNMI. That includes the islands of Saipan and Tinian, where there were just horrific World War II battles. And almost exactly 80 years ago, the Enola Gay took off from Tinian with the atomic weapon that it then dropped on Hiroshima. And when the Japanese lost Saipan and Tinian, that was their inner defense line, and they knew that was it for them, because the B-29s were within range of the Japanese mainland. So that's why those battles were just horrific and included, the bonsai charges and people throwing themselves off cliffs. Are just awful, horrible. And the horror of that battle was one of the things that fed into the US thinking about, if it's this bad on Saipan and Tinian, where families will throw themselves off cliffs and wounded people will charge at us knowing they're going to die, then imagine what it'll be like if we actually have to try to invade mainland Japan. And I went into the thinking of the rationale behind dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. And just south of that is Guam. So that whole chain is the Mariana Islands, and the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. It's the Northern Islands, and Guam is the southern island. And to the south there, you've got American Samoa. So when people think of a map of the U.S., they tend to think of the continental U.S. And you might have Hawaii in a box and Alaska in a box, but actually the U.S. goes from the U.S. Virgin Islands in the east to Alaska in the north to American Samoa in the south to Guam and CNMI in the west. And the Pacific is I would argue, is actually the U.S.'s strategic heartland. It's not the Eurasian landmass that Mackinder talked about. It's the center of the Pacific. And that's why, and they've known that. This is when McKinley talked about why they took Guam and the Philippines after the Spanish-American War in 1898. They were very explicit that it was because if a hostile foreign power controlled that part of the Pacific, the mainland wasn't safe. It was also the rationale for the annexation of Hawaii, again, that same year, 1898. And CNMI, what's now CNMI, and what is now those lighter blue countries across the middle, Palau, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, those three were all also were part of the Spanish Empire at the same time. And the US took Guam and the Philippines, but it didn't take the rest. And what Spain did was sell it to Germany, that had already set up in part of the Marshalls and some other places. And then Germany lost that whole area to Japan in 1914 at the beginning of World War I. So from 1914 until when the US came through in 1944, mostly, that whole area belonged to Japan. And for 30 years, it was doing what China is doing now, which was very overt civil military fusion stuff. So they had a special great exercise off of Saipan, actually, in 1933. And the first plane to take off in Micronesia took off from Saipan from a runway that the local Japanese sugar company said it was building a baseball field when it was actually building a runway. And it was very much the kind of Japanese empire said to the sugar company, we need you to support the national effort, just like a Chinese company would. And they set up this runway. And after the war, and after 100,000 Americans died, they said, we're not going to do this again. We now really get if hostile power controls the center of the Pacific, we're at risk. So we're going to hold on to Guam again. They offered and then the rest, CNMI, Palau, Marshall Islands, Federal States, and Micronesia had this Micronesian Congress where they decided their future. CNMI decided to join the US. So it's the newest part of the US, joined the US in 1970s. The other three went independent, but then signed these compacts of free association with the US, which allows their people to live and work freely in the US. They can join the US military. The US gets strategic denial. So if you put the map up again, if you don't mind, I'll let it then. So if you can see again, those three lighter blue ones across the middle, they're called the freely associated states. So they're independent countries. But the US has strategic denial, can deploy from there. And when we talk about first island chain or second island chain, those are only viable for the US because they can get across the center of the Pacific, because they have strategic denial in the center of the Pacific. So first and second island chain are a luxury because of the center of the Pacific. So that's just to kind of set up how, from my perspective, I think how important this zone is. And then we can talk about how, if you want, how the Chinese also see it this way, because they're aggressively trying to undermine US position across the center of the Pacific, including coming in through CNMI in a way that is just shocking. So any questions or thoughts about that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing the same thing with the Solomons in the south.
Yeah, they're doing this. That's right. So during World War II, because Japan controlled that center part of the Pacific, the US couldn't get across directly once Pearl Harbor was hit. And the US had to go down through the Solomons, start up through the Solomons, and then come back across kinetically. And it's almost the reverse of what China is doing now through political warfare. Because the US has this political and economic relationship with the center of the Pacific, that's a bit harder for China to go at immediately. So it's getting in deeper with Solomon Islands and Kiribati, which is where the Battle of Tarawa was, for example. So it's emplacing through political warfare in the way that the US had to emplace through kinetic warfare, whatever it was, 80, 83, 84 years ago. So yeah, sorry.
I mean, it's as simple. It's basically island hopping, exactly what the Americans did.
Yeah, through political warfare, through bribery and corruption and what the Philippines called ICAD, illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive activity. And
Interesting. They have that term for it, huh?
Yeah. And well, because the Philippines see it all the time, so they've
Yeah, I mean, Wang Marcos was here in India last week,
yeah,
and his conversations were, you could make out.
yeah, and so this is just to get across. So I think we talk often, if you talk about Mackinder, they talk about the geographical pivot of history being Eurasia. I would argue from US, it's always been the Central Pacific. And they were worried about the Spanish, then they were worried about the French, and then they were worried about the Japanese, they were worried about the British, and now but the Chinese. If anybody, any other major power gains control over the Central Pacific, the US is at risk economically and strategically. So one of the reasons that they extended this offer to Commonwealth of CNMI to join the US in an agreement that was so important, they called it the Covenant, was to kind of reinforce that that relationship with the people of CNMI. Yeah, so that agreement it's the Covenant, and it was voted on in a referendum in CNMI, and they voted to become part of the US. Now, they didn't have the same economy, and so they were given some control over their immigration and labor laws. And what ended up happening was the Chinese garment sector set up there and brought in basically, a lot of near slave labor in compounds, and produced clothes that could then be stamped "Made in America" because it was made in America. And that was pre-WTO. A few other things happened. There was some change in labor laws that died down. But then what happened was uh, there was a governor who was a legislator at the time called Governor Torres, Ralph Torres. And the population, there was a lot of pressure from China to open up a casino, and the population didn't want it. They voted against it multiple times. Then he went on a fact-finding trip with some other legislators and others to Hong Kong and Macau. And you know how those trips go, right? And he came back a big fan of casinos. And so they wrote legislation to give exclusive license for a casino in Saipan to a Chinese company.
Money laundering.
In the first 3 months it was open, there were less than 20 tables. In the first 3 months, it ran $5.3 billion.
Jeez.
And then over the next few, and then it was averaging at one point about $2 billion. The amount. There's a very good Bloomberg article on it if anybody's interested. Just if you type in Saipan and casino and Bloomberg, the reporting will pop up. The amounts of money were off the charts, and on the board of the casino was James Woolsey, who used to be director of the CIA, and among the advisors were a whole bunch of former Democrat governors, and Louis Freeh, who used to be director of the FBI.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So the casino. Now, at the same time, and until very
India is bad for buying Russian oil, huh?
Yeah. Well, this is the U.S. I need to remind you, this is happening on U.S. soil, and at the same time, and this is true until today, Chinese can arrive without a visa in CNMI. So until very recently, they didn't need anything.
What? What?
Yeah.
And they can just fly an internal domestic flight to the.
So
Whoa.
until recently, there was nothing. Now there's an online form they have to fill out called EVS TAP, and that's it. It's not a visa. There's no B1 or B2 visa. They don't have to go to the embassy or consulate for an interview.
And they can, by the way, fly to
No.
Hawaii and fly.
They're not supposed to leave CNMI. That's what they say. They're not supposed to leave CNMI. Okay, they're supposed to arrive in CNMI. Enjoy the casino or whatever they're going to do. The casino's now closed, but the assets are being bid on by another we think Chinese-linked company. But they're not physically supposed to leave CNMI, but at least by the hundreds, and undoubtedly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was more. They're illegally taking the 60-mile boat ride to Guam, where they have been found on U.S. military bases. They've been found selling drugs. They've been found involved in human trafficking. And in CNMI, the woman that ran the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, which is where they do the driver's licenses, was convicted along with a Chinese colleague of selling U.S. driver's licenses, which is a form of ID, American ID, to Chinese without lawful visas for being in the country. So they've also been using the postal, because once you're in the U.S., you have access to the U.S. financial system, the postal service, all those other things, birth tourism. This is the U.S., okay, and this is in a place of population of about 45,000 people, and yeah, and there was, but 45,000 people, and there are billions coming in through. I mean, it's you can imagine the level of distortion, and at the same time, you have the airfield that the Enola Gay took off from in Tinian, Northfield. That is in the process of being rehabilitated as a divert airfield. So hundreds of millions of defense dollars, are going in to rehabilitate the Northfield site.
By the Americans.
By the Americans. But there was.
I have to ask.
Yeah, well,
that's a valid question.
It is, and
probably the Chinese are building it. You never know.
Well, but guess what popped up on the dual-use harbor for a little while before it was shut down? A Chinese casino. Right. So this is, to me, this is like the clearest example of the difference between a kinetic warfare approach and a political warfare approach. So and in fact, if you go to my Twitter feed, there's a picture of it right on top. If you stand on the top of Mount Tapachao, you look out. At the time I took the photo, you can see off in the distance 3 U.S. military prepositioning ships. Those prepositioning ships are designed to have enough equipment to fight a small war or to help a country survive a disaster. They're kind of raw power. They've got everything from meals to tanks. But then if you look onto land, the biggest building in downtown Garapan, which is the capital of Saipan, is this Chinese casino. So which do you think wields more actual power in the decision-making process and in the way things operate in Saipan? Those 3 big ships offshore, or that the money that was running through that now defunct but possibly soon resurrected casino?
Jeez.
Okay, so a governor was elected in CNMI recently. He was elected, I guess, in 2022, came in 2023. He called Arnold Palacios, who came in. When he came in, what he found was the previous governor, who I mentioned, under the previous governor, Ralph Torres, there had been a lot of money that came in during COVID for COVID relief, ARPA funds and CARES, a lot of just government funds to keep things going during COVID, about $1.6 billion. And he came into office, the new governor, Governor Palacios, and there was no proper accounting. He couldn't find out what had happened to a lot of the money. And there had never really been a proper investigation into what happened with the casino and a whole bunch of other things. And so he very quickly, right at the beginning, in congressional testimony, said publicly and repeatedly, "Come investigate me." He asked the FBI, he asked Treasury, he asked any U.S. federal government agency he could. He said, we're opening up the books, look at everything, let the chips fall where they may. I don't care what happens to me. And it's a very tight-knit society. So if there was corruption, it's very likely some of his relatives would have been affected. But he was a man of incredible courage. And he knew that CNMI didn't have a chance if the corruption wasn't cleaned up. It was heading in towards that, Chinese, that grip that China gets when it starts to buy up the key people, affect the judiciary, affect that. He didn't want that to happen. And he knew that the way around that and would be to go after the corruption. And also, frankly, he was embarrassed that they kept asking for federal funds, but the federal funds were potentially being misused. And as a man of honor, he didn't feel like he could keep going to DC and asking for more federal money if he couldn't account for the money that had already been given. It's a very unusual leader. It was like I recently watched the film 12th Fail, right? I know it's sort of like that kind of a guy. He just wanted things to be clean. That's all. And he did everything. He was trying to talk to the Japanese about investments. He publicly met with the Taiwanese in Saipan 2 weeks before he, and this is it, died. So he died suddenly on the 23rd of July. And so now a lot of those efforts that he was undertaking may not be continued under the next what we see now. And in particular, so Commonwealth of Northern Marianas is part of the US. They send a delegate to Congress. That delegate to Congress, Representative Kimberlyn King Hines, was on the Commonwealth Ports Authority that approved that Chinese casino on the harbor in Tinian. The man that is who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs at the Department of Interior, which is a very influential position there. He's from CNMI. He ran for Congress in 2018, and his campaign financing filings show that among the people who contributed to his campaign were people associated with the Chinese casino. And the woman who's representing them in Congress, she has been advocating very forcefully for a continuation of the situation where Chinese don't need a visa to come to CNMI. And she's also advocating for a lifting of the cap on direct flights from mainland China into the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas. So, yeah, so I attended the funeral of Governor Palacios. I interviewed him a few times. We hosted him for a public talk when he came to DC. A lot of respect for him. And so I went out for the funeral. And this gets to your question from a half an hour ago about DC, because this is the death of a sitting governor of a U.S. territory. So who is honest and who's been fighting for cleaning up his territory and has been trying to hold off this Chinese influence. And the level of representation that was sent from the administration, the highest ranking person from the administration was this Deputy Assistant Secretary who, when he ran for office, took money from the casino. And the highest ranking military representative was a rear admiral who came over 45 minutes away from Guam. So there was nobody even really came from Hawaii. Nobody that I saw came from Indo-PACOM, for example, HQ. They didn't come.
They're all busy with Pakistan right now. So.
Yeah. So what that does is it signals to the locals, Well, so that you know how Chinese political warfare works, right? So they'll spin that up to say, see, they don't care about you. And whether it's true or not or whatever, it's a very effective messaging. Here was a governor who repeatedly asked for investigations. He never got his investigations. In fact, on the 1st of July, the FBI announced it was closing an investigation into the previous governor and some of the casino activity. And what are they supposed to do? And so I think what'll probably I've seen the way this works in other locations, and at the same time all of this is happening, there's a very aggressive um, information warfare operation moving to try to, for example, uh, make people um, less happy with any of the U.S. military engagements. So, for example, when Indo came through to talk about their environmental impact work for what they were going to be doing on Tinian, those public meetings were disrupted by a range of NGOs, including like Marianas for Palestine type NGOs.
Huh?
Yeah. Uh, and there's
Sorry, that just what? Ariana's Palestine. Oh God.
yeah. So, so there's going to be a big push, I think, against, and some of it's very sincere, some of it's sincere concern, and some of it is, the kind of operations or backing that you've seen in other places.
There is no sincere concern for Palestine anywhere.
Uh,
Even the Palestinians don't have it. I'm
well,
sorry.
well, this was
Full.
very much of a
Ah,
anti-US military
yeah.
thing, and there'll be anyways, and so that's happening on one side, and at the same time, what happens when the Chinese come in, because there used to be a lot of Japanese investment in in Marianas, that kind of got pushed out. The Koreans came in, but the Chinese and pro-Chinese investors are pushing out the other investors. So making it some sort of more of a hostile operating environment for the Japanese and Koreans. And as it stands, there's actually 10 times more, or 8 to 10 last numbers I saw were in February, and there were about 8 to 10 times more Korean tourists than there were Chinese tourists. But what I think the goal is going to be over the long term is to, and we saw it with a place like Palau, the Chinese come in with directed tourism money and push out others. So they block book hotel rooms, they block book flights, that sort of thing. Artificially expand their space in the economy. At the same time, you get an increase in this anti-US rhetoric. The US doesn't care about you. They're making you into a military target. They're not going to defend you when the time comes. Why do you want to be bombed? If you put in these sites, then and slowly, or maybe not so slowly, shift it towards wouldn't you prefer to be independent, an independent country, but then and maybe have a compact or free association with the US, like Palau, like your other cousins
Micronesia.
used to have. Yeah. So you can still live and work in the US. So you don't worry, you wouldn't have to lose that, but you're independent and you wouldn't have to have these this be a target, and you're economically independent of the US, and you become more independent on China. I think it's consistent with the sort of rhetoric we've seen elsewhere. Whether it would work or not, I don't know, but it's not absolutely not inconceivable. And we've seen President Panuelo, for example, of Micronesia, when he was president, wrote about how there were how the Chinese were backing independence movements within the Federated States of Micronesia. And you can see it. Like once you see those patterns, you can see that it's not complicated.
What are these guys doing? Why are they asleep at the switch?
Who's they? Who takes responsibility for CNMI?
Isn't it part of some Indo-Pacific policy somewhere?
Yeah, you'd think, but this is a kind of odd thing because it's a territory. It's actually under the Department of Interior. Okay, so the same department that's responsible for like national parks is
Fair enough.
responsible.
But are you trying to tell me the entire US administration is, and with, I presume some smart people somewhere saying, boss, we have a hole here. We need to plug this.
Yeah,
Because,
so
why am I saying this? There is a certain amount of aggression that you can see with Chinese influence within, to negate that Chinese influence within Pakistan, to negate that Chinese influence within Bangladesh, to negate that Chinese influence within Azerbaijan. I believe, Donald Trump is meeting with Azerbaijan and Armenian president together to kind of seal the deal for the proverbial Zanzibar corridor so that there can be a future NATO base in Azerbaijan. And you know what the game is after that, right? So that, they can reach Iran from the north as well. And of course, block off China, the Trans-Caspian Sea corridor for the Chinese. So there's a lot of geopolitics which is taking place in that region.
yeah, so
Why
they,
not here?
I think because people don't understand Chinese operations like we do. I mean, you've seen it. You've seen it in Sri Lanka. You've seen it in the
Mhm,
Maldives.
mhm,
You
mhm,
don't. People. Yeah, I'll give you an example. So the representative from CNMI, Representative King Hines, she somehow has managed to convince colleagues in Congress, including Jim Jordan and Brian Mast, who are hardcore, strong on border type people, to
mhm.
support her position. At least this is what she says. This is what she publicly says, to support her position on no visas for Chinese. Now, I don't think that's what she told them they were doing. I think she asked them for support on EVS TAP, and she told them EVS TAP was enhanced vetting, but it was enhanced vetting from a starting point of 0. So 5% is more than enhanced, but I don't think anybody came to them and briefed them about what they were actually supporting. There was a letter from 3 dozen members of Congress in November 23 saying, shut down this EVS TAP thing. Every Chinese person coming into anywhere in the US should pass through the same standard, and that standard is a B1, B2 visa. That's what they said, and they delineated all of the problems. Like they're showing up on the bases in Guam. They're committing major crimes. Like if you've got a house where all the other doors and windows are closed and you have one window that's half open, that's where the bad guys are going to come in, right? So, but somehow she managed to convince them to support her position. And she's said that she has a delegation coming out from the Department of Transport to CNMI this month in August. And I'm sure she's going to try to convince them to lift the cap on direct flights. And, they, I'm getting painted as like an extremist just because I'm saying, you know, everybody should like, and I'll tell you another thing actually was, they'll say it's so, it's hard to get a visa and stuff. So I went to the State Department website. If you're applying for, they tell you how long the wait time is in months. So if you're applying for an appointment for a B1, B2 visa interview in Delhi, it currently takes 5.5 months to get the
Mhm.
interview. In Beijing, do you want to guess how long?
2 days?
0 months. So I don't know, like not not even, so whatever it is less than a month.
Walk-in.
Yeah,
Right
yeah,
this way, sir.
that's right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So
Mm.
why can't they get a visa? Just get a visa. Like and why is she came into Congress and this was her number one agenda item, not better healthcare for veterans or cabotage, which is another issue they have about airplanes, or you know, and it was get these Chinese tourists back, get these poorly vetted Chinese tourists back. That was her number one agenda item. So you and I see that, and we see red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. Um, but it's presented as, she presents it as economic development, and it's different than national security, and our economy is hurting and we're starving, and if we don't get these Chinese tourists back, then everything's going to fall apart, and don't you care about the poor people and that sort of stuff.
Interesting. But so that basically tells you there's a huge gap opening up in the Indo-Pacific. In the Pacific.
This is, I also went to YAP in about a month and a half ago. So YAP is, if you're in, so there's Palau is here, Guam is here, YAP, where I went to, and YAP is in the middle. And Secretary Hegseth had announced about a $2 billion military investment in YAP. And YAP is both the name of an island, but also the name of a whole state. So it's like, New York, there's the city of New York, and then there's the state of New York. And the investment is going to go onto the island of Yap. But I had heard that there was Chinese activity further out in the state of Yap. So I took a local transport boat where everybody sleeps on the deck, and this a whole other thing, is it's very hard to get to the outer islands. And went to this atoll Wooley, which takes 4 days by boat, and got there the day before the president of the country showed up for the groundbreaking of a Chinese state-owned company beginning the work of rehabilitating an old Japanese imperial runway. And I tell you, there were no U.S. government representatives anywhere nearby. So they're focusing on one island, and they've got their big plans and their agreements, and they're having problems with it also for other reasons. But meanwhile, Chinese they got a government contract from the government of FSM. Of course, they bid very low to make sure they would get it, to rebuild this. And yeah, Wooley is a very traditional culture, and it seems really remote. When you're there, you're like, you have to take an open deck cargo ship for 4 days to get there. But it's whatever it is, like 600 miles from Guam. Like, as the missile flies, it's actually not very far. It's just hard to get to. And they've got what it is, like 30 Chinese guys who are going to live on the work site for the next 8 to 9 months. Initially, they were dumping their raw sewage into the taro patches. They're starting to cozy up to the local teenagers who are bored. They're on this island, right? This is the most exciting thing to happen to their island in a long time. And here's machines, and before they had maybe half a dozen cars or trucks, and now they've got all this equipment and these boats and these guys who are, with cigarettes and alcohol, and teenagers are teenagers, right?
Yeah.
So, and so there's all of that going on. So it's just not good. It's just not good. So who's watching out for all of this? I mean, again, the guy who is that Deputy Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs at the Department of Interior, he's also responsible for YAP. He's responsible for CNMI and Guam and all those 3 countries across the middle of the Pacific.
Wow. I mean, so what's the whole game with regards to this whole? I mean, the nationalism and all that Trump is kind of putting across, where this stuff is just being ignored.
So who's been really supportive of the CNMI story and the death of Arnold Palacios has been Steve Bannon.
Okay.
So I've been on. I was on that.
I saw that. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, he had me on 3 times in 2 days. He live streamed the funeral and the mass for the governor. he for that section of MAGA, America first means all Americans. And
Yeah,
and
if this is your country, then this is your country. I mean, take care of them.
yeah. And so he's actually a Navy guy. He was in the Pacific Fleet. So he knows about the sacrifice, the 100,000 Americans who died during World War II. He knows the geography. He knows the importance of the islands. So he's been very supportive of this story, and he live streamed that funeral. This is the 40,000 people watched that live stream. Yeah, that's almost as many people as who live in CNMI watched the Bannon live stream of the funeral, and he commented. He was on there commenting in the chat during it, and that was very meaningful to a lot of people on the ground. To feel like there was somebody who cared, and and I had people,
This is the second island. This is the second island chain, basically.
it is the heart of the second island chain.
I'll kind of do one thing. Let me just share my screen and I'll show it to people. This is the second island chain. Yeah, here we have it. So yeah, I mean, this is the first island chain going across like that, and you have the second island chain being seen right here. Yap should be somewhere here or here. I mean, I could zoom in.
Yeah, there's Palau. Yeah, that's Colonia. That's Yap. That's the head. That's Yap. That's the main island of Yap. If you go up, that's it. And then if you, so that's where
this is the runway. This is the Yap runway. Yeah,
that's right. So there's about $2 billion that should be going in to that area, extending the runway, building up the port and stuff. But I don't know if you can get over to Woolly-Eye. So and actually just a little bit north of that, what you see to the north of that and to the northeast is Ulithi. Ulithi was the largest. This is Ulithi. Ulithi was the largest U.S. naval base in the world towards the end of World War II. The U.S. had 600 ships in the lagoon at Ulithi. To give you an idea,
in this area. Wow.
Yeah. That's how strategically important this whole area is. And then if you go over to the east of Ulithi, a little bit to the south and east, you'll see Woolly-Eye. Yeah, that's the name of the whole kind of thing. But there you go, Woolly-Eye. So that's where I was. And that's where if you go to Falalep, that's the old Japanese runway where that the Chinese are currently rebuilding. That's the high school.
Yeah.
So the kids from the high school are right next to the runway where the Chinese workers are. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
yeah, this is the second island chain that we're talking about. This is right here. I mean,
yeah, that's it.
This is it. You can actually see it on Google Earth pretty clearly. This is the first. This is the second. We were talking about islands here, here, and here.
Yeah, and a little bit further up, Guam and CNMI. Yeah, they're a little bit further up there.
That is right
there you go. Yeah, there's Guam, and you can see there the Marianas. That's Rota. That's part of CNMI. That's the closest part. So when the Chinese get on the boats to go to Guam, they leave from Rota. You can see how close it is.
And then there's the Northern Mariana.
There's Saipan.
And this is the Tinian.
Tinian, yeah.
It's the old...
So it's to the north of the island. You can just see the outlines on this map. Those are the old World War II runways that are being rehabilitated now. That's where the Enola Gay took off from. In fact, that little pink spot might be. Is that where the? That's the old Japanese. These places are full of old Japanese buildings because these were for 30 years. This is where the Japanese built up their civil military and then more military fusion.
Interesting. I know this region pretty well. I mean, I've I spent enough time on Google Maps doing all this stuff. So
Yeah.
I know this place. This is a very strategic area.
Yeah. So imagine a
Goes across
multi-billion
goes
dollar
across the
Chinese.
that.
Yeah.
So this is a complete breach. I mean, it seems like
Yes.
somebody's asleep on the switch. So yeah, that tells us the Indo-Pacific policy. You've answered it pretty well. So let's just, I want to take the next about 10-15 minutes with like a quick fire sort of a question round with you. What's up with Trump and China? Where do you see that?
I have no idea. I mean, I'm not trying to be coy. I mean, I
No,
don't.
but that's a good answer, by the way.
Yeah.
It's in today's world, it's an acceptable answer. I don't know what the hell is happening. It's an acceptable answer. Yeah, I get that. So I mean, see, the reason I'm asking is with um, the whole tensions with India right now, the whole reorganization and recalibration of the world, which is taking place. India is going. Prime Minister Modi is off to China in the month end. Putin is off to India. He's coming here. Um, President Lula is coming here. I think India is going to come into the center of a lot of things. Next year, the BRICS summit is here, so Xi Jinping will come here. Um, we are the president. India is the president of the BRICS now, so you
Yeah.
know that this next year all the activities will happen here. How do you think that whole thing is going to go down with Trump? Because it's going to sound like nightmares to him more than Melania leaving him alone in the night sometimes.
Yeah. I look. It doesn't for anybody who cares about democracy and think. You have to think that a free and open Indo-Pacific is not just an American project, and that it's something that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, but it's true. I mean, it's something that India cares about, Japan cares about, Philippines cares about, right? So, I mean, as important to me as what happens with Putin or whatever is you're still meeting with President Marcos. We'll still. I would be. I don't know what direction it's going to take, but I can't imagine the Indian strategic community uh, thinks that India's future is better with a stronger China. And
Okay.
I mean,
I won't say that. I don't think so. It's more or less we probably don't. I mean, it's an interesting point that you've put across. It's not with a stronger China, it's with a more balanced multilateral game where you hedge with China and play with Russia and play with the West. And that's something that we will be doing going forward because we're not interested in being anybody's lackey or anybody's game in that
yeah,
fashion. But
but I
if
also think India has understood and has for a very long time that there's strength in numbers and not just
so,
the
yeah, it's a
the big
positioning game.
guys. Yeah, but it's also it's it's Philippines and I don't know, Malaysia and Indonesia and Japan and there are all these other countries that uh, combined are potentially more powerful and better economically for engagement and all
That's
that
the,
sort of
that's the
stuff.
point. That's the point. So that's where the BRICS comes in. That's very interesting, actually, that you say that. That's where the BRICS comes in, and that's where Donald Trump is kind of having nightmares. Um,
But the BRICS nightmares are that it would affect the dollar, and I don't think India would benefit from stronger yen. So or yuan, the
renminbi
renminbi.
or
Yeah,
yuan or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I have to. I can certainly understand the concern over. Uh, the India-US relationship has had really bad ups and downs. I mean, there's no question, and it's not. And you would think, based on the compatibility of the societies and economies and outlook and all that stuff, it could ride through a lot, and it has ridden through a lot. Um, but I also think that the India consolidating within the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific to create a more stable and open sphere is rational, obviously, um, and is probably what Indian strategists are thinking about. It's I don't I t- I don't think it's either or top level stuff. Like I think it's
No.
the strategists that I've heard of from in India are very complex thinkers, and they're thinking over long term. They're looking big and small. They have very complex security issues to address. So I don't think this is a great situation to be in. I think things could be a lot better, but I'm not
Honestly, can
worried.
and you've put out something very interesting, and I'll just kind of simplify it, if you permit me, that
Yeah,
India
please.
has always kept its own Indo-Pacific policy. US was a part of our policy, not the center line of it. And that's where you will see the kind of confidence within Indian analysts today who will say, okay, fair enough. If they don't want to play game, that's fine. We'll figure it out ourselves. It's a very clear thing because that possibility has been war gamed, is being thought of, that one fine day there would be a point when the Americans will not be able to stand here and exert the kind of force that, or the kind of pressure that uh, probably we would like them to do in a certain situation. So, how do you deal with that? Right. So,
Yeah.
we need to create our own force. And that's what is happening here. That's a very interesting point that you put across. I'm going to ask you one more question. Last question, if you permit me, is the strategic pivot to Asia, which was supposed to happen under Barack Obama, has been thoughtfully delayed, if I may, by the Chinese. Very well done. Starting from Ukraine, where the Chinese ambassador today, so the Chinese foreign minister pretty much told the Europeans, we don't want this war to stop because then you
Yeah.
guys will all focus towards us. He said that openly. And still, the West is kind of not understanding the pivotal mistake that they're making today. Stuck in the Middle East, stuck in Europe, antagonization of this part of, I would say, Southeast Asia, the entire Indian subcontinent, as well as ASEAN. I'm not sure if ASEAN is extremely happy with what's happening with Trump and his tariffs and this and that as well. They're a weak economy. They'll be taken over by, individually they're weak. Combined, they might have some strength, and that's why they kind of force towards ASEAN. What's America's outlook with regards to China right now? Is just a delay tactic that Trump is following because he can't do much, or is there something behind it where you see some action in Pakistan and you see some action in Bangladesh and in the
Yeah.
Central Asian region, as I discussed? So where do you
I
put it right?
I really don't know. I mean, I really don't know, and I I I I wouldn't underestimate um, the effect of it. There are major changes going on in DC.
Mhm.
So, for example, USAID is basically gone. The NSC went from whatever it was. I mean, it has lost a huge amount of staff. So, for example, this thing on the Pacific Islands, they they had a Pacific Island person, and he was one of the people who was furloughed. And so they're very seriously overworked, and the head of the State Department is also head of the NSC. So
Yeah.
you have, I mean, it just structurally, this the system, and that old system was not very helpful for India. USAID, there were issues there, and if you look at Bangladesh and kind of things like that, there were issues. So I don't know whether this is a deconstruction that's going to lead to a reconstruction of something else, and the chaos is a byproduct of that. Or, but I wouldn't underestimate um, how how really pitched the battle is now in DC and in the US as a whole. I mean, things are going to the Supreme Court all the time. There's redistricting going on in Texas. That's actually probably one of the most important stories, because if they get those 5, if they redistrict, and I don't know if you're following this, but Tex
Little bit,
Texas
not. not completely, but yeah, I am aware of what's happening.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know, just the way that the way congressional seats. So this is the House of
Yeah,
Representative seats. They're allocated based on population, and the
yeah, yeah.
way yeah, and
It's called delimitation in India.
yeah. Well, in the US, what that's based on is the census. And what they've been doing with the census, they haven't been distinguishing between US citizens and people who just live there. So you can end up with that's so if you've got 10 million people who just walked across the border and they walk into areas that are a certain a Republican or Democrat, then you can change those seats and you can change the way the numbers and the way that that looks. And so the what's happening in Texas is they're arguing that there should be 5 extra seats given the growth of the population and the growth of population areas that are Republican. And so that would give 5 extra Republican seats at the next Congress and or whenever that goes into place. And that because Congress is so tight, that could tip the Congress towards a Republican Congress. So the so the sort these are the sort of fights that are going on. They're very fundamental, and does the president have the right to close down the U.S. Institute for Peace? Does the a lot of parts of the system are being tested, and now they've come out with the with a potential charges for a coup under Obama,
Yeah.
right? Where the DNI has put into the public domain documents that are extremely troubling. So just to say, and in the context of all of that, there are very few people under the best of circumstances that look at India and DC. There are very few think tanks that include somebody who looks
You're
at India.
basically saying that they're just too mild up in their own fight.
They're mired up in their own fight, and India has a very limited public profile in DC. They don't
Yeah.
have the Chinese and the Pakistanis. They pour money into think tanks to have all sorts of people pushing their various lines, right? The Indians don't do that, and
No,
the and
we've started doing that now, but
well,
we are limited.
and the Indians that they do have, frankly, they're not necessarily in tune with the India of today. So if I asked you what India experts are there in DC who you think accurately represent or
No, no.
yeah,
I've seen honestly, I've seen the experts and I've been fighting with them online as well. Some of them are like, "Oh, Modi should pick up the phone and talk to Trump." This is, and you know why? Because their foundations are in threat right now.
yeah,
Their trust
so
funds are in threat. Their endowments are in threat. That's the only thing that they're worried about.
yeah,
They're not worried about the anger of 1.4 billion people that are saying, "Listen, I'm not going to open my agriculture. I don't want to have milk from a cow that has been fed meat.
yeah,
That's my red line. I don't want that."
yeah. No, I get it, but you know, those 1.4 billion people don't vote for redistricting in Texas, right?
That's the
So,
point. Yeah,
and
that's the thing.
so
It's yeah.
yeah,
I
so
get it. I get what you're saying.
yeah,
It's
but
very
but
weird. It's
it's
very
when you're sitting in India, it's easy to go, We're a big deal. We're we're growing at 5 or 6% a year.
no,
We're
I
one
understand
four
that. I
billion
understand
people.
that. I
We're
understand what you're saying. Absolutely.
yeah,
Because it's and I keep saying this all the time. It's misdirected. Everything is just haywire, hunky dory, because we don't know what's the real game behind. We don't know what's actually happening in terms of the recalibration around the world as well as internally in America, and all that really impacts everything around the world. We
mhm.
are seeing racism going up. We are seeing all sorts of things. So it's weird. It's just a
Yeah.
weird world in today.
I know it's and it doesn't feel good, and it's almost comforting to think it's conspiracy and not incompetence. because if it's conspiracy, then you think, okay, well, then if we can just get to the bottom of the conspiracy, then maybe
Yes.
we can sort it out. But if it's incompetence, then it's like,
It's
what do you do
I
now?
think it's incompetence and agendas.
Well, there is, just like in CNMI, a ton of money going into pushing it in a certain direction.
Hashtag Sino Wahhabi leftist lobbies. That's what I say.
There you go.
Yeah. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
You look at any situation around in that area or any area in the world, ठीक है, and where you have a problem.
Hmm.
Break it down. What's the Chinese influence? What's the Islamic lobby doing there? And where are the leftists? As you said, Marianas for Palestine. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's all of that. And it's one of the most dangerous geopolitical times in history, right? So
Mm.
it certainly doesn't feel good.
Yep.
So that's
But
all I got.
thank you for bringing this out because I think it'll convince a lot of my audience at least that we need to be doing our own stuff as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. And I've been saying that I've been an advocate of that. Cooperate with everyone, but work with no one. That's
Yeah.
my game. Work on your own, cooperate with everyone, and get your shit done. That's what our policy should be, and that's what I've been trying to say. And I think what you brought out today, it really tells us that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not for you, who will be?
Who are you for?
Yeah. So that's where it starts, and then you see, I mean, I think what I've seen from India is then you see who you can help along the way, who are fighting a similar fight to yours, and then it broadens out, right? That's where the family part comes into it. So, and you've done that in the Indo-Pacific, and what India has learned from the way China operates in the Indian Ocean islands is directly relevant for what's going on in the Pacific. And we had a conference online thing with the Chennai Center for China Studies and some Pacific Island colleagues, where what was being discussed about what India had found out about how China was operating in the Maldives was directly relevant for something Palau needed to know. And that sort of reaching out, you
I
don't,
mean, we got rid of that at least. That was a bit dangerous, honestly. I mean, we used to joke about it, but that was a bit dangerous.
yeah.
Thankfully, we got rid of all that stuff. That temporarily, at least, for the time being,
Well,
things have started looking up on our end. So that's
that hasn't been gotten rid of in the Solomons or a bunch of other places, and you know how to do it. You've so you have, and India is more secure the less these island fortresses fall into hands that might want to use them for
jumping
anyway.
grounds.
Yeah, island hopping, like you said.
Yeah. Thanks, Cleo, for that heads up. I must say that clarifies a lot, and your inputs about the second island chain, something that India needs to talk about. And as a matter of fact, Prime Minister Modi himself went to Micronesia and Palau and all these areas. I think Jaishankarji went to Palau, and we are now the first responders to that region, as signed in the treaty between we call them Pacific Island nations. We don't call them small island nations.
Yeah.
In India, there's a term called the Pacific PICs.
Yeah, Pacific Island countries.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we call them that, and I think we need to kind of get our act together because nobody's going to come to our rescue or anything like that, and that's something which is very clear. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you,
Yeah, good
and
to
we've
see
been
you.
missing out.
Yeah.
And thank you for the time. And to the audience, share your comments. Tell us what you guys think about the Indo-Pacific policy of the Americans, and what do we need to do. Please put that in your thoughts. She's given you a very clear example of Chinese takeovers happening, and we've seen where they are happening. So let us know. Thank you so much once again.
Thank
Namaskar.
you. Bye.